The afternoon my ex-girlfriend's family tried to set me up with her mother as a joke, I learned something simple about cruelty. It almost always needs a crowd. Kindness can happen in an empty room and never ask for credit. Cruelty is different. Cruelty wants witnesses. My name is Wesley Barrett. I was 35, and I fixed broken furniture for a living in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a job most people don't understand until they hand you something their grandmother owned and watch you bring it back from the dead. I ran a small restoration shop off a side street where the rent was cheap and the light was good. Old chairs, water-stained tables, a roll-top desk somebody's uncle left to rot in a barn. People brought me things they couldn't throw away and couldn't stand to look at, and I made them touchable again. It's honest work. It also, I would learn, is apparently the kind of work that can end a relationship if the woman you're dating decides that makes furniture sounds better in her head than it does out loud at her friends' weddings. I'd been single for about 2 years by then, and I want to be clear that I wasn't bitter about it, just tired. There's a difference, though nobody in my family seemed to believe it. My sister, Kayla, treated my single status like a medical condition that ran in the family and could still be caught in time. She sent me screenshots of women she'd found online with the enthusiasm of a person forwarding job listings to the unemployed. My mother asked about grandchildren in the specific, wounded tone of someone who has already emotionally purchased a crib. I loved them. I also learned to let my phone go to voicemail on Sundays. The truth is I'd been peaceful. Quiet mornings, sawdust, coffee that got cold while I worked. I wasn't hiding from love. I'd just stopped auditioning for it. Which is why, when my old friend Corey called to invite me to a housewarming, I said yes without thinking too hard about the guest list. That was my mistake. Corey and his wife, Dana, had bought a house with a deck and a mortgage, and Corey had reached that stage of homeownership where a man needs an audience to validate the size of his loan. Small thing, he said. Just people. Nothing awkward. I should have hung up right there. Nothing good has ever come to me after the words. Nothing awkward. The house sat up a hill in a new development where every mailbox matched, and the trees were too young to give shade. It was late June, hot in that wet Carolina way where the air feels like a held breath, and the sky had that low gray ceiling that meant rain was coming and taking its time about it. I brought a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce and a good attitude I couldn't keep. Because the first person I saw on that deck, holding a drink and laughing at something with her whole polished head thrown back, was Sloane Merrick. Sloane and I had dated for almost 3 years. It ended without a fire. That was the strange part. No betrayal, no screaming, no third person. Just a slow drift into a conversation where she said she thought we wanted different lives, and I finally understood that different lives was a polite way of saying she wanted a man whose job made a better sentence at parties. She'd said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. You can survive being hated. Being gently outgrown is harder. Standing next to her now, one hand resting on the small of her back like he'd been assigned to it, was a tall man in a linen shirt unbuttoned exactly one button past confidence. Trent. I'd heard about Trent. Trent did something with commercial real estate and smelled, even from across a deck, like a cologne commercial that had gotten lost on its way to a yacht. He had the kind of tan you have to schedule. I almost turned around. I want that on the record. I had my hand on the gate. Then I saw her. She was sitting a little apart from the crowd, at the end of a long picnic table, in a linen dress the color of old paper. Margaret Merrick, Sloane's mother. She had gray hair she hadn't apologized for by dyeing, cut short and neat, and she held her glass of iced tea with both hands the way people do when they're not planning to drink much and just want something to hold. She wasn't shy. That's the thing I noticed first, before her face, before anything. She wasn't shy. She was still. Like a woman who had walked into a party full of her daughter's friends, understood the exact temperature of the room within 30 seconds, and decided not to give any of them the satisfaction of watching her flinch. I'd met Margaret maybe a dozen times back when I was with Sloane. She was a bookbinder, a conservator, technically. She repaired old books, rebuilt broken spines, mixed her own paste, pressed torn pages back into something whole. Her husband, Tom, had died about a year before Sloane and I broke up. I'd liked Tom. Everyone did. He was the kind of man who fixed your porch step while you were inside getting him a glass of water and then acted like the step had fixed itself. Margaret and I used to talk, back then, in kitchens, at the edges of things. She was the only person in that whole family who'd ever asked me a real question about my work and then actually listened to the answer. She looked up and saw me at the gate. Something crossed her face. recognition, then a flicker of something that might have been apology on my behalf, like she already knew how this afternoon was going to go and was sorry I'd walked into it. So I came in, because leaving felt like letting the deck win. For about 40 minutes, it was fine. I said hello to Corey, admired the deck he needed admired, ate a piece of chicken, avoided Sloan the way you avoid a light that's too bright. I ended up near the drinks cooler talking to Dana about grout, of all things, and I remember thinking I might make it out clean. Then Trent decided to give a toast. He tapped a bottle with a ring, and the deck quieted, and Sloan got that particular bright look she got when she knew something was about to be funny at someone's expense. I'd forgotten that look. Seeing it again was like biting foil. All right, Trent said. I just want to say, great house, Corey, great people. And, hey, since we're all here, his eyes found me, and I felt the whole afternoon tilt. I heard we've got a bachelor in the house. A couple of people laughed the pre-laugh, the one that comes before the joke because people already trust it'll be worth it. Wesley, right? Sloan's told me about you. He hadn't said it cruelly. He'd said it worse than cruelly. He'd said it like I was a charity case whose story he'd been briefed on. Good guy, single. And you know what? He gestured, wide and generous, like a man about to give away a car. Margaret's single, too. Great lady. You two should hit it off. I'm serious. Somebody's got to shoot their shot around here. The deck laughed. I need you to understand what that laugh was. It wasn't a laugh at a joke. It was a laugh at a setup. It was the sound a group makes when they think they're about to watch something interesting happen to two people who didn't ask to be a show. Somebody at the far end leaned back in his chair like he'd bought a ticket. Two people had their phones half up, casual, ready, the way you hold a phone when you're pretending not to film. Sloan had her hand over her mouth, and her eyes were wet with the effort of not laughing louder. My ex-girlfriend, watching her mother and me get offered to each other like a punchline and finding it delicious. And Margaret sat at the end of the table with her iced tea in both hands and did not move. That was the moment. I know that now. Everything I am as a man got decided in the 4 seconds after that laugh. Because here's what they wanted. They wanted me to be embarrassed. They wanted me to do the flustered thing. The no, not like that thing. The visible recoil that says God, not her. She's old. She's the mom. As if the worst thing in that yard was the idea of a woman past 50 being desirable. That was the joke. The joke was Margaret. The joke was that she could be an insult. And I was supposed to agree, out loud, with my face. Or they wanted the other thing. They wanted me to lean into it, be crude, make it dirty, give them the gross version so they could feel clean by comparison. I set down my drink. I walked over to the end of the long table, past all of them, and I did the only thing that made sense to me, which was I pulled out the chair beside Margaret Merrick and I sat down in it, close, like I meant it, and I looked at the crowd, and then I looked at her, and I said, loud enough to carry, he's right. I'd be lucky. The deck went quiet. Not the good quiet. The other one. The kind where a room realizes the show it ordered isn't coming. I've known Margaret for years, I said. Still easy, still calm, because calm was the whole point. She's the smartest person any of you invited today, and I'm including the guy who just tried to make her a joke. I lifted my cup an inch toward Trent, pleasant as church. No offense. Somebody exhaled a real laugh then, surprised, on my side now, the way crowds turn. Sloan's smile had gone flat and strange. Trent's tan couldn't cover what his face was doing. I turned back to Margaret, quieter now, just for her. You want to get out of here? I'll drive you. This chicken's a war crime anyway. For a second she didn't answer. She was studying me with an expression I couldn't read, the same look, I'd learn later, that she gave a damaged book before she decided whether it could be saved. Then the corner of her mouth moved. It really is, she said. I think Corey boiled it out of fear. Get your bag, I said. I'll start the truck. And that was how it began. Not with a spark, not with a violin, but with two people the room had decided were leftovers, walking out through the gate together while the party tried to figure out whether it had just watched something sad or something it should have wanted for itself. It started raining before we got to the truck. Of course it did. She was quiet for the first mile. I didn't feel it. One thing you learn restoring old things is that you don't force the joint. You let it come. Somewhere around the second traffic light, she said, to the window, You didn't have to do that. Do what? Defend me like I'm a person. I kept my eyes on the road. You are a person. I'm aware. A pause. I'm just not used to being treated like the news hadn't gotten out. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything, which turned out to be the right thing, because after a minute she laughed, low, almost against her will. "This chicken's a war crime," she repeated, in front of the host. "I stand by it. You made 2 enemies today. I make furniture," I said. "I've got low overhead. I can afford some enemies." She turned and looked at me then, really looked, and I felt it land somewhere I wasn't ready for. "Yes," she said slowly. "I remember. You fix things." I dropped her at the old Merrick house, the one I remembered, a tall craftsman with a deep porch and hydrangeas going leggy along the walk. She had her hand on the door and then she stopped. "There's a desk," she said, not looking at me. "Tom's. A roll top. The drawer's jammed shut and the timbre won't roll and I'm selling the house, Wesley. I have to get it presentable, and I can't look at that desk long enough to fix it myself." She finally met my eyes. "I'll pay you. I'm not asking for a favor. I don't do favors well." "I know you don't," I said. "That's how I know you'll actually let me do the work." She almost smiled. "Tuesday," she said, and went inside before I could answer, which I'd come to understand was very Margaret. She gave you the door and let you decide whether to walk through it. I walked through it. That's the part I could tell you about for hours, the middle of it, the weeks that didn't look like anything and turned out to be everything. Because Tuesday I showed up with my tools, and I found the desk in the back room where the light was thin, and I found that a roll-top desk with a jammed drawer is a 2-hour job if you're competent, and a 6-week job if you keep getting handed coffee by a woman you'd rather talk to than work. The house was full of boxes, half-packed and then abandoned, the specific archaeology of a person who kept starting to leave and couldn't finish the sentence. She'd tape a box shut and then, 3 days later, I'd notice it open again. One thing taken back out. A book, a framed photo, a single coffee mug, 2 mugs. I should tell you about the mugs. That first Tuesday, she handed me coffee in a heavy chipped mug, the dull green of a chalkboard, and she drank from one with a faded fern printed on the side, the pattern worn nearly off from 1,000 washings. Those 2 mugs. They lived by the sink. She never once offered me a different one, and I never once asked for it, and by the 3rd week, the green mug was just mine, the way a chair at a table becomes yours without anybody deciding it. We didn't talk about anything, at first, which is to say we talked about everything except what we were doing. I sanded the timbre slats and re-waxed the runners while she sat across the room mending a book with a bone folder, and we discovered we could work in the same silence, which is rarer than people think. Then the silence got comfortable enough to hold words. "Why books?" I asked her once, watching her ease a torn page flat. "Because people throw away what's broken," she said. And I never had the stomach for it. A spine cracks, a cover tears, and everybody's ready to replace the whole thing. She smoothed the paste with 2 fingers. "But the story's still in there. You just have to be willing to sit with it long enough to hold it together while it heals." She glanced up. "You'd know. You do the same thing. You just do it louder, with clamps. Clamps are underrated. Everything patient is underrated," she said, and went back to the page. "I want to tell you it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was the opposite of dramatic, and that was the whole miracle of it. It was rain on the windows and the smell of glue and old wood. It was her telling me, one gray afternoon, about Tom without her voice breaking, and me learning to just let her, not fixing it, not filling it. It was the day the garage got cold because a front came through, and she went upstairs and came back down and handed me one of Tom's old flannel work shirts, soft as a broken-in glove, and said, "Don't make it weird." And I put it on and didn't make it weird, and wore it every cold day after. It was the 2 of us at that sink, our shoulders not quite touching, the rain coming down, and her hand next to mine on the counter, close, and neither of us moving it away. That's the whole thing, a hand that doesn't move away. People wait their whole lives for a hand that doesn't move away. She was witty in a way that snuck up on you, dry as August. She never once asked to be liked, which is exactly what made it impossible not to. And somewhere in there, I couldn't tell you the day, I stopped restoring a desk for a woman and started spending my afternoons at the only place I wanted to be. The thing about being underestimated for a long time is that you learn to recognize it in other people. And Margaret had been underestimated for years. By the daughter who saw her as furniture. By a world that had looked at a widow past 50 and quietly filed her underdone. She'd spent 4 years being Tom's widow and Sloane's mother, a supporting character in everybody else's story, and she'd gotten so used to the role that she'd started believing the casting. But not with me. With me, she was just Margaret, and Margaret was the most alive person I knew. Two things from those weeks I keep coming back to. The first was the salvage yard. The desk needed a drawer pull to match the ones that were left, brass, a specific worn oval you can't buy new, and the only place in 3 counties likely to have one was a reclamation yard out past the highway run by a man named Duke who wore 2 watches and trusted no one. I asked Margaret if she wanted to come, and she said, "You're asking if I want to spend a Saturday in a barn full of dead people's doorknobs," and then she got her coat. We spent 3 hours out there. It rained, naturally, drumming on the tin roof while we dug through crates of hardware in the half-dark, and she was better at it than me, faster, holding pieces up to the light and rejecting them before I'd finished picking them up. "Wrong period," she'd say. "Reproduction. Somebody replated this one. Look, the wear's fake." She found the match herself, of course, buried in a coffee can, and held it up with the specific triumph of a person who has just proven she is not useless, and I realized that was what the afternoon had really been about. "You did that on purpose," I said in the truck. "Found it faster than me." "I have no idea what you mean. You wanted me to see you win one." She looked out the window for a while. Then she said, quietly, "It's been a long time since anybody handed me a problem and just assumed I could solve it. Tom did. And then Tom was gone, and everybody started handing me casseroles instead." She turned the brass pullover in her fingers. "You handed me a coffee can. I could kiss you for the coffee can." Then she heard herself and went very still, and I very kindly pretended I hadn't, and drove, and let the joint come on its own. The second thing was the storm. There was a night the power went out across half the city, a real Carolina thunderstorm that shook the windows, and I was still there because I'd stayed too late again, and you don't drive in that. So we lit candles, and she made grilled cheese on the gas stove by feel, and we ate it at the kitchen table in the dark while the whole sky came apart outside, and something about the candlelight and the noise made us both honest. She told me about the year Tom got sick, the parts nobody asks about because they only want the sad, clean version. I told her about the 2 years I'd spent thinking I was peaceful when I was mostly just parked. She told me Sloane had been embarrassed of me the whole time we dated, that she'd heard her own daughter apologize for my job at a dinner. He restores furniture, but he's very smart. Like smart was an excuse, and that she, Margaret, had wanted to say something and hadn't, and had regretted it for 3 years. "You never owed me a defense," I said. "No," she agreed. "But I watched a good man get treated like a hobby by people who'd never made anything with their hands in their lives, and I said nothing, because it wasn't my business." She looked at me across the candle. "I'm making it my business now. Late, but I'm making it." The lights came back on an hour later, sudden and rude, and we both blinked at each other in the ordinary electric light like 2 people caught doing something, and neither of us said what it was. I drove home at midnight in the last of the rain. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for 10 minutes before I went in, because I wasn't ready to be anywhere she wasn't, and I didn't have a word for that yet, and I was afraid of the word. The desk was almost finished the day I found the letter. The jammed drawer had been the last thing, the one I'd saved because it was stubborn, and I liked having a reason to come back. When it finally gave, sliding free with that clean sound a well-made drawer makes, there was a false back behind it, the kind old craftsman built for the small private things. And in the false back, water-stained at one corner, was an envelope. On the front, in a man's careful hand, it said, "For Meg. For when the house feels too big." I knew whose hand it was. I'd seen Tom's handwriting on 100 little repair labels around that house. I could have opened it. I want you to know I thought about it for about half a second, and then I felt sick that I'd thought about it. I put down my tools and I called her in from the other room, and I held it out, and I watched her face do something I hadn't seen it do, not once in all those weeks. It came apart. She sat down hard in the desk chair and held the envelope with both hands, the way she'd held that iced tea at the party, the way she held everything she was afraid to want too much. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew he was going before I did. He kept saying he'd leave me a map for the hard parts, and I thought he meant the will, the insurance, the—" Her voice stopped working. "I can go," I said. "You should read that alone." "No," she caught my wrist. It was the first time she'd reached for me. "Stay. Please. I don't. I can't be alone in this house with his voice." So I stayed. She opened it, and she read it, and I watched a woman I'd only ever seen composed cry the way you cry when you've been saving it for 4 years. I didn't touch her. I just stayed close enough that she'd know I was there, which is the only useful thing you can do for a grief that isn't yours. When she could talk again, She read me one line. Just one. She said Tom wrote about the house, about how she'd fill it or leave it, and either was allowed. And then he wrote, "You were never the quiet one in the room, Meg. You were the one everyone was too dim to hear." She set the letter down. The rain kept on. "I'm selling the house in 3 weeks," she said, flat, like she was steadying herself on the words. "It's already under contract. I'm moving to Oregon. My sister's out there. I put a deposit down on a little place before." She stopped. "Before you started fixing that desk, I felt the floor go out from under the afternoon." 3 weeks, I said. 3 weeks. "Margaret, don't." She stood up fast, gathering herself, gathering the letter, gathering the version of her that didn't need anything. "Don't say it like that, like it's a tragedy. I'm an old woman with a house full of boxes and a plane ticket, and you're—" She gestured at me, at all of me, at the flannel shirt and the sawdust and the 35 years of me. "You're a young man who was kind to me at a party where everyone else was cruel. That's not a life, Wesley. That's a nice afternoon. Don't do that," I said. "Don't decide what this is so you don't have to feel it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Finish the desk," and left the room. And I understood that I'd been dismissed, and I didn't know how to argue with a woman who'd spent 4 years perfecting the art of leaving before she could be left. I finished the desk. I stayed away 2 days to give her room. And on the 3rd day, I came back to deliver a small drawer pull I'd matched. And that's when it fell apart, because Sloan was there. Sloan's car was in the drive, and I almost left. And then I thought about Margaret alone in that house with her daughter, and I went in anyway. They were in the kitchen. Sloan had clearly been going through the boxes, appointing herself executor of a life that wasn't over, and she turned when I came in, and her face did the whole story at once. Surprise, then calculation, then something ugly and pleased. "Wow," she said. "So it's true. Corey said you two left together, and I thought, no way, he's just being nice to my mom. But what is this, Wesley? You're here? Again?" "I'm dropping off a drawer pull," I said. "I'll leave it and go." "He's been fixing the desk," Margaret said. Her voice had gone back to the party voice, still, armored. That's all, Sloan repeated and laughed, but there was no joy in it now, just something acid. "Mom, do you have any idea how this looks? Do you know what people are saying? My ex-boyfriend is hanging around my widowed mother. She searched for the word and found the one designed to do the most damage. It's embarrassing for both of you. God, it's actually kind of sad." There it was. The joke, back again, weaponized this time by the one person who should have loved them both too much to throw it, and I watched Margaret take it. I watched her decide, in real time, that the cost of me was going to be too high. That being with me would mean being a story her daughter told with that curled lip for the rest of her life. That the safest thing for a proud woman who'd already lost too much was to lose one more thing on purpose, on her own terms, before it could be taken. "She's right," Margaret said. "Margaret, thank you for the desk, Wesley." She wouldn't look at me. "Send me an invoice. I'll have the movers handle the rest. You don't need to come back." I stood there in Tom's flannel shirt with a drawer pull in my hand, and I understood that I'd lost. That pride and fear and a cruel daughter had done in one kitchen what 3 weeks of rain and coffee couldn't undo. I set the drawer pull on the counter, next to the 2 mugs, and I left. The next stretch, I don't have many words for, which is unusual for me. My workshop got quiet in a way it hadn't been before her, because now I knew the difference between quiet and empty. I finished other people's furniture. I brought other people's grandmothers back from the dead. I ate standing up. The flannel shirt hung on a nail by the door, and I couldn't wear it and couldn't put it away. Kayla called, and I let it go to voicemail, and then I called her back. And when she said, "You sound weird. What's wrong?" I said nothing, which was the biggest lie I'd told in years. It rained most of that stretch. The channel of my life had always liked rain. Now it just felt like the sky agreeing with me. 10 days in, I did the math I'd been avoiding. 3 weeks minus the days I'd stayed away, minus the days I'd spent being a coward. She was leaving in 4 days, and I thought about the letter. "You were the one everyone was too dim to hear." I thought about how a man who knew he was dying had spent one of his last careful acts of handwriting, trying to tell his wife that she was never the small thing in the room. And I thought about how she'd read that, and cried, and then 3 weeks later let her daughter tell her she was small, and believed it. Because it's easier to believe the cruel thing that lets you stay safe than the kind thing that asks you to be brave. I closed the shop in the middle of a Tuesday. I took the flannel shirt off the nail, and I drove to the tall craftsman house in the rain, for what I figured would be the last time. There was a moving truck in the driveway, half loaded. The hydrangeas were gone, cut back to nothing for the new owners. The front door was open, and through it I could see the front room stripped down to echoes. She was standing in the middle of it with a box in her arms, and when she saw me in the doorway, she stopped, and the box stayed in her arms like a shield. "You're supposed to send an invoice," she said, "not deliver it in person. I'm not here about the desk. Wesley." "You don't get to do this," I said, and my voice wasn't calm now, and I let it not be. "You don't get to sit in a house that man built you and read a letter where he tells you you're the one nobody was smart enough to hear, and then let your daughter tell you you're a joke and pack it into a box and drive it to Oregon. You don't get to prove Tom wrong on purpose just because being right is harder." She set the box down, slowly. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I said. "You're the most alive person I've ever met, and you're about to bury yourself in a spare room 3,000 miles away because you're scared that wanting something makes you a fool. So say it. Tell me you don't feel anything, and I'll get back in the truck and drive away and never fix another thing of yours as long as I live." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The rain came down on the empty house. Somewhere the movers were arguing about a dolly. "I'm 55 years old," she finally said, and her voice was very quiet and very steady, the most naked I'd ever heard it. "Do you understand what that means? It means I have spent 4 years being Tom's widow and 28 years being Sloane's mother. And somewhere in there I stopped being a woman anyone would want in a way that isn't." A punchline. That party wasn't wrong, Wesley. It was just early. I look at you and I see the joke coming. I see the day, 5 years from now, 10, where you look at me across a table and you're 40 and I'm 60 and you finally hear what everyone's been laughing about. "That's what you're scared of," I said. "Yes. You want to know what I see?" I took a step into the empty room. I see the only person at that whole party who didn't need an audience to be worth something. I see a woman who fixes broken things nobody else has the patience for. I spent 3 weeks in a garage with you, and I was never once bored. And Margaret, I am bored by almost everyone. I took another step. "You keep telling me what everyone else sees. You told me at the party you weren't used to being treated like the news hadn't gotten out. Well, here's the news. It got out to me first, before all of them, and I've never once been able to make myself unhear it." She was crying now, but standing very straight, the way she did everything. "I still miss him," she said. "Tom, some days it's the whole day." "I know," I said. "You should." "I'm not asking to be Tom. I'm asking to be the guy who's there on the days you miss him." I was close now. "And some days I'll miss you too, right in front of you, because I'll be so scared you're about to leave. So we'll be scared together. That's the offer. It's not a good one. I fix furniture and I've got 2 enemies at a housewarming, and I don't know how any of this works. But it's honest." She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached up and touched the collar of the flannel shirt I was wearing. Tom's shirt, on me, in the middle of the house Tom built. And instead of it being wrong, it was the most right thing in the world. And I watched her understand that, watched a whole argument she'd been having with herself for weeks quietly lose. "You kept the shirt," she said. I couldn't put it away. She laughed, wet and broken and real. "You are going to be a tremendous amount of trouble." "Low overhead," I said. "I can afford it," and she kissed me. In the empty front room, with the rain going and a moving truck half loaded in the drive and everything either of us owned in boxes, she kissed me, and it was not a young kiss, and it was not a frightened one. It was a choice. It was a woman choosing, for the first time in a long time, to be heard instead of quiet. When we came apart, she kept her forehead against mine for a second, the way you do when you're not ready to open your eyes and let the world back in. "The house is still sold," she said. "I know. I'm not unselling my house for a man I've kissed once. I would be alarmed if you did." "But I could stay," she said, testing the words like a floorboard. "In Asheville. I could find a smaller place. One that doesn't have his voice in every room. I could. Start something that's only mine." She pulled back and looked at me, and the fear was still there, but there was something underneath it now that was bigger. "Not for you. I want to be clear. If I do this, I do it for me." "That's the only way I'd take it," I said. She sold the house. She let the movers finish. But the truck went to a little rented place across town instead of to a plane, and the first thing off it, the thing she wouldn't let them carry because she wanted to do it herself, was the roll-top desk. We put it in the front window of the little place, where the light was good. When people ask now how we met, and they ask, because we are exactly the kind of couple people feel entitled to ask. Margaret usually says, he came to fix a desk, and I say, she let me stay for coffee. Both of those are true. Neither of them is the whole truth. The whole truth is longer and involves a party and a joke and a laugh I still hear sometimes. And the fact that the cruelest afternoon of my life turned out to be the one that finally introduced me to the person I was supposed to find. That was almost 2 years ago now. The desk is still in the front window. The false back is empty. The letter lives framed on the wall above it, where she can see it every morning. You were the one everyone was too dim to hear, in Tom's careful hand, and she doesn't cry when she reads it anymore. She just touches the frame with 2 fingers, the way she smooths a healed page and gets on with her day. She opened a small bindery in a storefront 2 doors down from my shop, so we walk to work together, and half the town now brings us their broken things. Her, the books, me, the chairs. The 2 people who never learned to throw away what everyone else gave up on. The 2 mugs are on our kitchen counter. The green one is still mine. The fern one is still hers. Some patterns you don't replace. And the flannel shirt hangs on a hook by our back door. And on cold mornings, I still put it on. And neither of us finds it strange anymore, because grief and love aren't opposites. They're just 2 things that can share a shirt. Sloane and I don't speak. Margaret and Sloane are working on it, slowly, the way she works on everything, with patience and no illusions. That's Margaret's to carry, not mine. But her mother did tell her, once, on the phone, in a voice I overheard from the next room, "You called me a joke in my own kitchen, Sloane. He called me lucky in front of everyone, you know. You should think about the difference." There's an old dining chair in our kitchen, one of a set of 6 I brought over from her storage, and it squeaks when you sit in it. A specific 2-note complaint, and I have offered 100 times to fix it because fixing things is literally my entire profession. She won't let me. She says a house should have one thing in it that talks back. She sits in it every morning with the fern mug and lets it squeak, and I have decided that is the sound of my actual life. Sometimes the person who truly sees you isn't the one who had you first. Sometimes they're the one everybody else was too busy laughing to notice, sitting still at the end of the table, holding a glass with both hands, waiting to find out if anyone in the room was paying attention. What would you have done if a room full of people you knew tried to turn a good woman into a joke and handed you the chance to laugh along? And have you ever been overlooked by the very people who should have known you best? Quietly written off, filed under done, while a stranger looked at you and saw the whole thing at once? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.